Welcome to the Go Big Redcast with Dave, Honke, Homer, and Redcast Rob.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast. I'm your host, Honke, and I'm with Redcast Rob.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's only Monday, but you know what? I think it's a good night for the Redcast. Tuesdays sometimes get a little bit boring, and who doesn't love Monday?
Got a case of the Mondays there, Rob. Also, a familiar face here to some in the Redcast Nation. For the first time since October, we've got Mac.
Yeah, it was a long time coming. We have a super special guest today. It's like Matt kind of dangled us out in front of me. I'm like, well, maybe I could figure out some time to get over there. Sure. So happy to be back and talking to our next guest here.
Well, I can't wait to talk to our next guest, and we're going to get to him in a minute here. I'm going to go through our housekeeping like we do every week. hillvarsity.com/subscribe. Use Redcast at the promo. Get $10 off for your yearly subscription. Redcasters on Wednesday, April 27th at 8:30. We're going to have Preston James Hillier, actor, Nebraska native, and Husker fan. He's going to be the first guest on our fan forum spinoff that we've created. And last but not least, Smack and Smooch, our custom shirts and specialty items. Call up Shane and Laura in Elwood at 308-325-2542. And we've also got the QR code. And, of course, we're wearing all the goodies, the shirts and stuff that they've made. So let's get to that guest. Tonight we welcome for the first time to the show a name that many of you in the Redcast Nation know well, either from his playing days at NU, where he was a two-time national champion, or his popular morning show, Sharp and Benning, on Omaha's official sports station, 1620 The Zone, or perhaps from his many appearances on the Big Ten Network, KETV, and Westwood One Sports. You can follow him on Twitter at Damon Benning. Welcome to the Redcast, Damon.
Hey, how are you guys?
Doing good. We like to start and kind of break the ice each of our shows with some tweets of the week, and that's a good way to kind of get things going. And want to start here with something you had from last week. First one here, the bet has been paid, receiving your tomahawk ribeye. Have you had a chance yet to cook that up and make it?
Yeah, I made that one yesterday. 90 minutes smoke, got it to about 115, then I seared it off. It was fantastic. He's a great guy, total P1. He listens to the show quite a bit. So, and he's a Creighton fan too. The bet was he didn't think that the Jays would finish above 500 in the conference in hoops. They started out as kind of like, I think they were picked 8th or something like that. And he wanted to wager, and I like good protein. So tomahawk it was.
Well, let's talk a little football here. A couple of the other tweets on the screen here. One of them was, you'd mentioned last week, who knows when it comes to Rogers, Casey Rogers.
Yeah.
And along the same line, this is exactly what I was joking about the other day, giving validity to my thoughts. I had a feeling, and it was on defensive linemen, the Big Ten defensive line, the average height and weight. Nebraska is at the highest on both the height and the weight.
Yeah.
And those two, let's just start the conversation with football, talking defensive line. Rogers we've heard more than enough about him the last few days, and maybe how the D-line is changing. Are we moving more to that fourth man front? We have some questions on that. Let's start with the D-line. Where do you see it right now? And where do you see it kind of going, I guess? How do you see it changing moving into next season?
Yeah, they've got some so they got a couple of options, right? You know, you guys, if you've ever listened to me, I'm kind of a glass half full kind of guy. So I'm into solutions, and I think they've got a couple. If they don't get the numbers that they want in terms of depth, they're portaling right now. They're waiting on Mathis and that whole production, and they've got a couple of other guys that they're looking at. If they don't get the body types they want from a depth standpoint, they can always go back to maybe playing an odd front, right? Get in some more 3-man as opposed to playing some 4 front. Now, if they do play some 4 front and they get the body types that they want, that tweet was kind of interesting because all week I was talking about after the spring game that I felt like, Nebraska was a little too big along the interior. I had watched a lot of the other spring games up to that point. I think 4 or 5 had been played, and just kind of going back to my recollection in the Big Ten, watching games, and they were lighter, quicker guys. And so I was just thinking out loud on the show, and I said, it seems like Nebraska is kind of more the plotting type. And I've coached both odds and even fronts, and I just typically I seldom see the 1 and the 3 technique, or the, both tackles, the nose and the DT, 300-pound guys. And so I was just kind of talking out loud. I said, I prefer a little more twitch, guys that can play at a 45-degree angle. And lo and behold, guys had data. They started fact finding right away and kind of showed me, that graph. And I didn't know for sure. It was just kind of a hypothesis, but lo and behold, Nebraska's the only team, that's starting a couple of guys over 300 pounds, and not that it's a bad thing, right? Because I think you have to be stout at the point of attack, and you got to be able to hold up. But I just don't see it a ton in this conference, even though it's a what I would call a power conference. It's more about athleticism and quickness. Guys like Colton Feast, Khalil Davis, Carlos Davis, the twitchier, quicker guys that I think can have some success. Now, you can be a plotter, right? You can be a guy that is really good at the point of attack. And Ash Hutmacher, he's got really good strength. He's got good hands. Ty Robinson, a big guy. The biggest I've seen him, he's got to be about 315 right now. But if you want to be able to play laterally and play at those 45s, as I like to talk about, I usually like a lot of lighter, quicker guys. Jason Peters is a bad example because he was so good to begin with, and he could play in a 3-man or a 4-man front. But the 280 guys, Jason Peters, 280 guy, and Ndamukong Suh, 290. I just and Sue was a 2-gap guy, so you need to be a little more stout at the point of attack. I get it. If you're going to play in gaps like a 1, a 3, a 5, a 7, typically you like a little more quickness. So Nebraska has options, but they do need some bodies. It is dangerously thin right now if you look at that D-line in terms of numbers.
Now, the point of talking about like 3-man versus 4-man, am I totally off in saying, is it possible that you actually true defensive linemen, could you need less defensive linemen in a 4-man front versus 3-man if you're replacing those outside ends basically with guys that were the outside linebackers anyways, if Butler and Gunnarsson and Nelson and those guys essentially are starting to become defensive linemen?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and that's where you have to really kind of get into the physics of it, because in an odd front, while you are playing with one less D lineman in terms of 3 versus 4, the body types, you're using more D linemen in an odd front because you're playing with, either guys that playing like a 4-eye or head up on those tackles, or a 5, which is outside those tackles. And they have to be big. They're the Richard Seymour types. Who was my guy? Justin Smith from Missouri that played with the Bengals. They have to be those kind of body types to be able to play in that 4-eye or that 5 technique. And of course you need a good solid D line. So you're right. You need 2 traditional linemen in an even front. You need closer to 3 in an odd front. And typically in an odd front, your outsides, those are still bigger bodies, right? They're the Garrett Nelson types, the Caleb Tanners more than probably a Jamari Butler. But the downside to that is those guys have to be really good at the point of attack and be able to play at the line of scrimmage. So there's pros and cons to both, right? The even front allows you to be a little bit more stout at the point of attack. The odd front allows you for more versatility, but you have to have more specific body types. So there's kind of some give and take there in terms of what you're after.
Do you think some of the lack of the body types is because some of the recruiting was pretty intentional on those big guys that we did get, but some of this attrition that's happened too, is that kind of adding to the lack of diversity and size on that line?
Yeah.
Or is that something maybe the coaches initially wanted to go with and now are kind of realizing, we need to be more adaptable?
Yeah, they're kind of in the middle. We saw this happen, in the middle of Bo's tenure when he went from Carl to Kaczynski, and he got away from kind of those squatty bodies to those long angular types to the 2-gap to wanting to gap guys out. And you had 2011, I think, and 2012, there were some misses along that defensive line, and rents due usually a couple years after those misses, right? It's not typically the following year. It's the second year that you got to pay the piper. And so for Nebraska, when you look at 19 and 20, and see what you graduated last year in 21, you got a little bit of a false sense of security with the super seniors, and you were an older bunch. You got young in a hurry. And most of those guys, the Marquise Blacks, the Rukon Buckleys, the Weavers, the Nash Hutmakers, like those guys, like the time is now. I mean, not to borrow a terrible John Cena song, but they don't really have that luxury. I mean, it is go time, and you got to put bubble wrap around Ty Robinson. Tate Wildeman just couldn't ever get it going.
Yeah, that's too bad for him.
And Casey Rogers has. I'll see how healthy he gets. I don't know how much confidence. I hope that his knees hold up, but I was scared for a little bit for a while. Maybe he had kind of a degenerative condition. So,
are you surprised, Damon, at the level of attention he's received since he's announced? I mean, it's the who's who, basically, at least in the Pac-12 and the Arkansas, and I think Purdue is the first Big Ten school.
Yeah, Auburn, SC.
Yep.
I mean, he's got his choosing, but it just lets you know, timing is everything, right? He was highly recruited, highly thought of coming out of high school. And it took him a while to get healthy and develop at Nebraska. But when he played, I thought he showed you flashes. And once he hits the portal, D-line, it's a scarce commodity. And it is it manifests itself in a hurry. There's no faking up front, right? Like some of these pretty skilled guys and us running backs, we could pretend and make a few guys miss and buy ourselves some time. It's dark in there up front along that O-line and D-line, and it takes real dudes. And you got to be able to hang in there and hunker down 35, 40, 45 plays. The situational rotation at worst, you're going to need 20 snaps.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the bodies, especially with these offenses, right? It's spread, it's up tempo. And
in the West, it's also the power ones. It's Iowa, it's Wisconsin, and then Minnesota throws a 8-man offensive line on you too. I mean, you're hitting everything.
Yes, the thing that I like about, so they're each a little different. We kind of lump those guys together because they're effective running the ball. Minnesota. Let's start there. They're the big, massive body types. They're the leaners, right? They lean on you and they push and they shove. Iowa has that little lighter, a little quicker outside of Wirfs and Larry Jackson. I mean, those guys, they were big boys, but they were so agile and adept in terms of getting to the second level. And they had that zone concept down pat. Wisconsin is very good with their G scheme where they get those guards on the move. They start with a lot of athletic basketball, wrestling body types, and they develop them into those consistent units that you see. So they're all a little different in their approach, but they're all really effective in what they do, man. They commit to it, and you need some big boys up front.
Well, you said earlier, you said rent's due and you got to get old. And I'll finish up the tweets of the week with a couple of just recruiting / roster management kind of tweets.
Yeah.
This first one here, college football transfers who want to be immediately eligible without a waiver for 2022 season must provide their school with a written request to enter the transfer portal by May 1st. So essentially it's going to be a busy week. And then along those lines, we're big on in-state recruiting on the Redcast here. And a couple tweets from Scottsbluff High School that Barrett Rude was out there last week. And then here's Monarch Football, Papiola Vista. And they had Mickey Joseph there and just saying that they were happy to have him out there.
Yeah.
And the way that, let's talk recruiting a bit. How do you rebuild your team? There's multiple ways to do it. Something you have an option at now that you didn't 10 years ago is that transfer portal. You can get old in a hurry if you get the right guys.
Yeah.
But the Texas Tech guy who has 900 snaps under his belt, the Texas Tech defensive lineman who was in town this weekend, that's a guy that has some experience. But you bring someone else in the transfer portal that doesn't, there's no guarantee that guy's going to give you immediate playing time any more than the guy's already on your staff.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Nebraska's in a little bit of a conundrum because, conventional wisdom says, hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. But if you're Nebraska, you're still trying to establish your culture. And there's a super fine line between being desperate and taking what's available because you think it can help you. And for those guys, you have to be careful, because one of the things that's gotten away from Nebraska that I think that they've really got to get back to is, I'm big into, like, you have to speak it into existence, say it out loud, and you have to acknowledge some things. And I think Nebraska has to say out loud, we are a developmental program, right? What we do is we develop. Our freshman classes should supplement. They should be in addition to. They can't supplant what we're doing. Nebraska doesn't need to be in the business of playing freshmen immediately. No. You need to be sprinkling in your redshirt freshmen, starting redshirt sophomores and juniors, and then turning those guys over to the next level. It's all about development. So they have to be careful with the portal. It can be a little bit of fool's gold. I know there's a tendency to panic because I think people think Coach Frost may be on the clock, but you cannot compromise. The thing that it's just my opinion, but the thing that I think will really serve Nebraska well is, I like their game plan, especially early on from a recruiting standpoint. Got a chance to spend a lot of time with Vince Ginta. I obviously know Mickey Joseph really well. I'm a huge Brian Applewhite fan. I see what these guys are doing and what the plan is. Coach Frost will tell you guys, hey, listen, I'm so competitive. I kind of got out of my comfort zone. I recruited some guys early on in my tenure that I ordinarily wouldn't have recruited. I took some chances trying to win, and it caught up with them. So what I think they want to do now is they're caught between a rock and a hard place, because I like the philosophy that they're showing in terms of they're getting back to the 500-mile radius. Character really matters. Coming from winning programs matters. They really want to focus on making sure that once you get guys in the fold, they're not looking over their shoulder to go to the next best place. So that comes with some characteristics that come with this recruiting area. So I like that. I do. And there's plenty of good players. And I don't care if they're along the O-line, D-line, or they're skill guys. Plenty of good guys that I think that they can focus on. Then you sprinkle it in with your coasts, right? Your Texas, your Floridas, your Californias. Get back into St. Louis. Get back into Kansas City. You got hidden gold mines up there now it's outside the radius, but you've got a really good feel for what's happening in Ohio. And I know, listen, that's big bad Ohio State territory, and that's fine. They can't get everybody. And so when you follow that blueprint and you get back to development, everybody else that you bring in has to fit your culture. I actually think that's one of the beauties to the transfer portal. There's more information known. There's more people to talk to. There's usually a track record or a body of work. So I liken it to going to the grocery store, but who you're asking for the recommendation has already tasted what you want to buy. You get to decide if you think that can fit your palate or not. That's kind of, if I was Nebraska, how I would use.
Yeah. I mean, that's my feel on bringing in the kid from Texas Tech this last weekend who has 900 snaps under him. Whether he comes here or not isn't my point. I haven't watched any film on him. I know nothing about him personally, but they have 900 snaps of Power 5 plays on him. You better have a pretty good understanding if you want the guy or not. Right. The thing that is a little concerning or different right now is you have transfer portal on one end, then you also have NIL. Yeah. How does NIL affect kids? Like, for instance, like Rodgers or someone that's been grinding here for 3-4 years, and maybe you don't have the big NIL, or you tend to get your NIL by going out and putting yourself on the market. And you're hearing all about whether it's Mathis or somebody else, they're going to come in here and make the big payday. Well, is that the incentive to want to leave? And you're trying to build that culture, like you said, Damon. So how do you build that culture if people that have been in it for 3 or 4 years are testing the waters, and people that are coming in are getting the NIL, and that's the incentive right now to do nationally?
Now, this is easy for me to say because my job isn't on the line.
Mhm.
But it's the same thing that I told Coach Frost a couple weeks ago. And this is the $64,000 question, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what you're. It's a fantastic question, but this is what I would do. And I'm not saying that Nebraska shouldn't play the NIL game. I'm not saying that you can't go out and get good players, but I would challenge folks to just sit down and think for a second. Before we're up in arms about what's going on with NIL, and we got to ask ourselves, okay, hey, what's the desired outcome? Who do we want? Who are we recruiting? And the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Oklahomas, the USCs, if we're going to clearly be in the discussion where we're going to come to recruiting battles with these guys where NIL is going to matter, then we got to win more games.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
But we get so caught up, right? The devil's in the details. So we're enamored with, oh my gosh, well, Alabama can pay this and Oklahoma can pay. Hey guys, newsflash, we're not competing with those teams.
Yeah. Damon,
Right?
I got a question for you here. I mean, there's a nationally ranked quarterback that is a legacy here, and we have a question from Jim in Minnesota. And if they could do it over, what might Nebraska do differently with Dylan Raiola's spring game visit? And look, I asked this question because I know you made one reference to it on a show about a week ago, but it goes bigger than this. Is that Raiola could commit tomorrow? He could commit to Nebraska tomorrow.
Good.
And it doesn't matter, right? Because if we go out and go 3-9, he's probably never going to come here anyways. I mean, so
Yeah, you're really never off the market anymore.
Yeah,
You're
right.
not-
So there's two things, and Jim in Minnesota is fantastic. He's a smart guy too, so I can talk to him like this. There's a couple things I would have done differently with Dylan. Number one, this is going to sound crazy. Okay. He needed more attention. They needed to reach out and engage and talk more. Hey, how you doing? It's weird with 2024s. I know because I have one in my house, and so you have to initiate. It's tricky, right? You just can't pick up the phone, but you can work around existing relationships. You can set up times to text. There's lots of ways to work around it, right? If I'm Nebraska, I try harder. I lay it on the line. The other thing is you take advantage of your resources. A lot of guys know Dom really well. A lot of guys that are around the program. There's some good insight there in terms of the family structure, what his wife likes, what he doesn't like, kind of how the family is. They got a guy down there, Jay Foreman, who's best friends with Dominic Raiola.
Mm-hmm.
Would have been a really good resource. And I say all that to say, make sure when you're putting your plan together that you've maximized. If you leave some stuff on the table or you don't feel like you gave it what you had, then you don't have anything to be mad about. And as I kind of look back at the Dylan Raiola thing, there's two things that I need Nebraska to do. Number one, don't let the results be indicative of how you feel about yourself. There's this feeling sometimes that I get that the staff or the players sometimes think they don't belong because they haven't won enough. So it's like if I'm back in high school and I'm not very good looking, or I'm in college and there's somebody that I think is more attractive than me and she may be out of my league and I'm not very confident, I may stumble and bumble and not really maximize kind of trying to quarter, right? Because I don't believe in me.
Gotcha.
And it shows up because it's being compared to all the other suitors.
Sure.
So Nebraska's pitch and Nebraska's game plan is being compared to USC, Oklahoma, Ohio State, and those things get relayed back, right? So you do this immediacy of compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
You got to think better of yourself. You have to tell yourself, if you're the University of Nebraska, we belong. We belong.
Kind of goes back to what you were saying too, with recruiting and going up against. You got to win more games. You feel better about yourself. You feel prettier if you're winning some more games.
But see, so it's the exact same thing in the fourth quarter when Nebraska starts checking the rearview mirror, right? They start looking, they're peeking, they're looking behind. Because they haven't been there and they don't feel worthy, they look for reasons to not continue driving. Man, we made it this far. How have we not ran out of gas? You know what I mean? Like, I like analogies because I think everybody can relate to them, at least in some degree. Nebraska's the team that wants so desperately to be good, but they have to figure out how to get from wanting to believe to actually believing. Because one you can see, the other you only hear. And I always tell people, as terrible as my eyesight is, I see a lot better than I hear, right? You can tell me anything.
Right.
But I much rather watch you act.
Rob,
would you say that Nebraska, because you said you like analogies, so I thought of a really good one. Nebraska's starting to kind of become maybe that peaked in high school guy, where the because you and I were about the same age. You're same age as these guys right here, and I've got kids that are probably old enough to play. They're just not athletes. But they haven't really won since 97 was like the last championship,
national
right?
championship.
They did have some winning years, but now all of a sudden it's starting to become the used to be's, right? And so I'm wondering if like maybe that's a syndrome that after we go 15-0 this year, as I keep telling everybody we're going to do, and you can make that face, but I look at the schedule and I'm hoping that they get this D-line here. Do you think that it's starting to become that sort of situation a little bit?
So I remember I'm in the solutions business. So there's a couple of options, right? You can't hop back in the time machine and go back to 97. You can't go back to 99. You can't even go back to the last second in, the Big 12 and playing Texas. But it's not that long ago with a team like Mike Riley, who's oft been maligned, and Nebraska was number 7 in the country.
Yeah.
And then this is going to sound weird, but I'm big into getting the most out of things. And for as disrespectful and dismissive as we are about that era and that transition, if it truly was that bad, somehow they got to number 7 in the country. And so I think to myself, if they can do it,
right,
we can do it.
Well, these are way better teams.
And so it doesn't have to be a deal. Just because it has been, doesn't mean it always will be.
Yeah.
And the minute you subscribe to that, guys, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
We were fan base.
We were 7-0 that year in 2016 and didn't really know exactly how good or bad we were yet. We didn't play the greatest schedule up to that point, be an Oregon team that wasn't, a great Oregon team by any means. And it was that 8th game. It was at Wisconsin.
We didn't know it at the time, though.
Well, but it was the Wisconsin game where we lose in overtime at Camp Randall, and they were top 10, I think, or top 25, and we were top 10. And we lose that game, but it was so close. And Ohio State had beat Wisconsin in overtime at Camp Randall. So it's like, oh my goodness. So the next week, Redcast Dave and I fly out to Columbus to go and watch that game. And we're on the flight out there. And these guys, we start talking Husker football. So all these people around us are like, hey, you guys should do a podcast. And they start talking football with us. And they're like, well, what do you think is going to happen? And I'm like, I'm not saying we're going to beat Ohio State, but I think what I saw against Wisconsin gave me confidence to say this is going to be a 4-quarter game. And what I saw with my eyes was it wasn't a 4-play game. And that's the 62-3 destruction. And it's just, how does a top 10 team lose like that? I mean, I don't know, but that leads us into areas that are completely different discussions. I want to keep talking solutions. One of the solutions is we're big into in-state recruiting, and you're going to see a name here that's probably familiar. He's in your house, but these are the in-state recruits that in 2023, we already have 3 kids from in-state, Gunnar Gottschalk, Benjamin Bramer, and Sam Sledge. And you look at that, that's Lincoln, it's Omaha, it's Pierce. Now we have 4 more that we've offered. And this is everything from Scotts Bluff, again, back into the metro, 7 offers to this in-state. And of course, there's a lot of talk about the one kid we didn't get, Gretna and going down to Oklahoma State, but my goodness, to offer 7. And then here we are already into 2024 with the offers to your son, and then Davon Hall and Danny Kalin, and then 2025 even. So the offers are out there, and the way to rebuild this program from the inside out, that 500-mile radius, has to start there.
Yeah.
I guess I'll kind of stop for a second there. And I mean, when you see that stat, when you're looking at those names and those numbers, I mean, does that give you some hope there? Does that make you feel good that they are definitely serious about trying to close down the borders again?
Absolutely. Just being around these guys since the new staff has been hired, listening to what some of the plans are, watching guys be recruited firsthand. I mean, Mickey was just here last week, and I talked to Coach Chenander this morning and trying to devise a plan. They know how many visits left they have at the school and who should tag team, and when to bring Coach Fisher in, because Coach Fisher isn't usually recruiting Nebraska, but they'd like to let some guys talk to potentially who could be coaching him. And what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, 4 for sure, you guys, if you want to be encouraged, it's much more organized. And I don't say that to say, oh man, in 2018 it was this and this. Again, I'm solutions. My glass is half full. Much more organized than I've seen it, where a Coach Fisher will text me on Friday and say, hey, listen, 2024 is I can't reach out. Can we do this, and this? And then we get going, and then we schedule the visits, and then we talk about other strategic kids in the metro and how to get to these schools and who needs to be seeing them. These are things that in the last 4 years, guys, I haven't heard. When I first saw Barrett Ruud, I was doing the spring game, that staff's first year, and he was crossing the street. We were going across the street from the Champions Club. And he said, I asked him how he liked it. And he said, he said, it's different. It's different than recruiting down in Orlando, and it's this, that, and the other. He says, I'm driving 6 hours almost in between recruits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see, that was going way up to see Garrett Nelson and then coming to see Nick Henrich and Chris Hickman, right? So it's gradually gotten better. Now, Nebraska's got to ramp their game up too, right? It's what's our philosophy? Who are we? And how does it fit? Once you start to strategically answer those questions, it gives you a better plan of attack. Listen, I'm probably Zane Flores' biggest fan. I think in my coaching tenure against him, we lost the biggest one. That was the state championship. But I have a losing record. I'm sure it's like 2-3, maybe. He's been beating me since he's been in the 6th grade, right? So when I watch him, I understand. See, I can still cheer for Zane Flores and know that he's a fantastic player. But for whatever the reason, he doesn't get the Nebraska offer. And I'm not mad at Nebraska for it, and I'm not mad at Zane Flores. What I'm thinking is, this is what I hope. Remember, glass half full of solutions. We got our 2023 guy. We like Watson. We like the way it fits. We've done our homework. Have some conviction. Don't be the guy that's talking to the girl that shot his shot that doesn't really feel good about himself. So 6-7 minutes later, he's saying something different to her, right? She's already made her mind up by then. Just have some conviction in what you're doing, and you're going to make some mistakes. You're not always going to get it right, but you have to have conviction in who you are, and other people will start to respond to that. Because if you're 15 different things to 15 different people, those guys talk. And bad news will always beat you home. So for Nebraska, it's more about establishing their culture and identity than going grocery shopping after you know what you want to cook.
I follow recruiting somewhat closely, but I don't follow like Nebraska high school sports that well. That's something I've always, when I tune into your show, you guys always drop some knowledge on that. So and you've been coaching in it for years, so you're very much in touch with that. But I have always picked up on, perception or not, that there's a disconnect between the UNL and the Metro.
Yeah.
And could that be, some of it's the organization you were talking about, no doubt, but could some of it be as simple as winning games? I mean, you got a son, we're about the same age. When my kids watch me watch Husker football, they simply do not understand how I still get upset about us losing, because it's, Dad, we've always lost since I've been, born. We've never been a very good team. So could some of the Metro disconnect be as simple as, hey, we've got some really good players in the Metro, and maybe they're not very interested in going and playing for a team that has struggled their entire life. You know, are we making too much of the relationships between the coaching staff and the Metro, or could some of it just be wins and losses?
All right, so two things can be true at once, right? Like, yes, I think it's a little overblown because Nebraska got off to a really good start recruiting in-state.
Yep, Henrich, Hickman.
First couple of years, I mean, they were swinging for the fences and they were getting guys. Now he had and I said this right when he got there, just because I knew the families, right? When you start talking about Caden Helms and Micah Riley Ducker and some of these guys, it's a different kind of recruitment because those are families that didn't necessarily grow up diehard Nebraska fans that that wanted opportunities to get outside of the state. The Avante Dickersons of the world always had an affinity to want to leave the state of Nebraska. It was going to be a tough road to hoe. So everybody kind of has a different case. Now, what happened from that, and I'm right dab smack in the middle of it in the Metro, so I can hear, is, well, you know, Nebraska isn't doing this or Nebraska doesn't do this. And to some degree, the effort wasn't there, but it didn't have much to do with why those players weren't going there.
Yeah.
The Helms, the Riley, those guys weren't coming to Nebraska. And they told him early, hey, thanks, but no thanks. We're looking for other opportunities. Keegan Johnson, they took it down to the wire. Now, that was tough, right? Because you went from Troy Walters to Coach Lubick, and Keegan, just his personality is very regimented. What do I need to do? Tell me how this looks to you. I'm a checkbox kind of guy. I'll go figure out how to get it done. That transition into kind of telling the story allowed a school like Iowa to get in there and get. Listen, you know, you got to give the devil his due. LeVar Woods and those guys, they do a good job.
Yeah,
I'm watching it firsthand. They do a good job, but it's nothing that is insurmountable. I listen to Coach Joseph. I listen to Coach Fisher. I listen to Coach Chenander. I listen to Coach Woods. I listen to Coach Jackson. All these guys that recruit. Nebraska has to just figure out and believe we belong.
Yeah. The emphasis is clear as day different. I mean, there was
no question.
There was a 10-year damn gap after Niles Paul and DJ Jones.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get you know, what would they get? Like Michael Decker
like
and
there weren't players coming out of there.
Deshaun Neal. I think they got those two like the first year of Riley, but that was like, even that, I mean, you're still losing Noah Fance along the way, and you're losing Harrison Phillips in bizarre ways too. I mean, just the emphasis, like people.
The last 5 months, they've been at Papio South, Bryan, Benson, Papillion, Creighton Prep, Burke, Central, West Side. Stopped at Northwest. Wanted to introduce themselves. The concerted effort to just be visible has ramped up tenfold in the last 5 months. That's not made up. I've seen it firsthand with my own eyes. They've been to Bellevue East. Check in at Bellevue East and see when the last time they've seen Nebraska at Bellevue East. And they've been to Bellevue East this winter. That's the real deal.
I've seen all the tweets. The effort is there. And I agree too. I mean, it's one thing if you're talking about Omaha being a 1-year issue a year ago. If that was the one case, like you said, the recruiting becomes an individual thing at some point. I mean,
it really is.
You break it down to the kid, but if we're making it something more systemic, I haven't seen that certainly with this staff. And from day one, this staff I think has been really serious about getting in state. Pandemics affect things with how much you can go and and actually see them.
Guys, I'm just telling you, Tyson, Terry, and Caleb are practically best friends, but you would recruit them vastly differently, right? I mean, they played on the same middle school team. He lives about 5 minutes from me, but you would recruit them significantly different. So recruiting is definitely an individual deal.
Damon, that's a great lead-in because you're in such a unique position in your role as a former Husker, former player of an era that was so revered. You're a radio personality. You're a TV personality. You're a coach within the state. You've seen kind of how it can go down on Twitter when a legacy player, I'm like Clester and you had to have these conversations, and you're wearing way more hats out in public than he is. Do you lose sleep sometimes about how it's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I used to, right? That's a fantastic question. You know, Caleb, we've talked about it so often since he's been in probably the 3rd or 4th grade. We have a lot of adult conversations, and my role is I just try to empower him to make good decisions. And my job is to guide and support. Now, he knows it's different with Nebraska. Yeah, I watch him. He watches me. He knows what happens on Saturdays. He knows what my job is. He knows how frequently I'm down in Lincoln. But to his credit, he doesn't allow that to complicate his thinking. He's got to do what's best for him. You know, I spent 9 years coaching at Omaha North. We won 3 state championships. He didn't pick my high school either. So,
there you go.
I'm well aware, and I'll be honest. I think I said this out loud, maybe not. Well, I mean, that hurt my feelings. Like, it on a personal level, it hurt my feelings.
It shouldn't, though. It speaks
and
well
I-
to your
I-
raising of him, that he could
Yeah,
tell, that he
you
could
know,
look at his dad and say,
Yeah.
"Sorry, Pops, you taught me too well. I'm going to go where I feel like
I had to kind of get over that a little. It probably took me, it was at least the weekend. I'll say something. No, I'm super honest. Like it took me like 72 hours. And I told him, you know, before I turned the paperwork in for option enrollment, because he was in the 8th grade, I asked him if he was sure. He said he was sure. I put my arm around him and I told him I loved him. I love the modular scheduling at Westside. I was a huge, you know, people that know me know my affinity that I had for Coach Frank. And he was very hard to prepare against. I love him as a person. And I joked with him. I said, you know, I had no idea, because he asked me, I was going to go coach 2 years ago, and I just wanted to sit out and just kind of watch. I felt like, you know, I loved Omaha North, and I didn't want to tell a girl the next day that I loved her too. So I took some time away, but not coaching hurt. It was during the pandemic. I was already kind of miserable. Nobody really liked being around me. And, you know, I needed to be coaching again. So when opportunity presented itself and he asked me to coach again, it was a good fit. And so I'm kind of watching this unfold, and all that I can hope for is that I've instilled the things in him that will allow him to make good decisions. He's going to take his time. He's just a sophomore.
Yeah.
You know, some people don't even think he's that good. So, you know, whatever happens, it will be his decision, and I'll guide him. And I think I stopped losing sleep probably about a year ago.
Good.
That's good.
Good.
Rob, do we have any questions from the audience? Well, I know we have quite a few, but try to get through a couple of them here.
Yeah, our good buddy Ken McCone here wants to know is he says that's what we used to be, right? Developmental, but how many kids will be patient enough to be developed with the portal and NIL out there for the taking? And I just want to add too that I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts, and especially the We Got a Podcast. I think it was your last episode where you talked about the NIL quite a bit, and actually referred to it as the Wild West, which I think those were your words there. And you know, I like you personally. So on top of this question, to talk a little bit more about that, because I don't necessarily agree with your total sentiments on that, but I do want to hear more about what you said because it's the podcast. And so I'd kind of like to, you know, hear a little bit more about why you think that about the portal and the NIL, because I have some different opinions on that, especially because I've been paying a lot of attention to it.
So like that needs context. And so anytime you allow something to happen without parameters in place and you become reactionary, you're going to have to let some things happen first before you can get your arms around it. I typically don't like to work that way. I like to limit the variables as much as I can before you make decisions, as opposed to the other way around. NIL, unfortunately, is not going to work like that. I'm a fan of it only because I think having your name is important. You've earned it. It's yours. It's your God-given. You should be able to do what you want to with it. And name, image, and likeness is important because that means you, the individual, have value. Now, what I think is going to have to happen before it settles is there's going to have to be some seismic shift, whether it's a breach of contract, whether somebody doesn't get the good or the service that they were supposed to receive. Something like that will have to happen for it to be reactionary, for it to kind of settle down. It's going to be tricky waters to navigate for the first couple of years, but I'm really okay with that. Here's the most important thing, though. If coaches don't want to play that game, they don't have to. If I'm recruiting and I get the sense, and I've done my homework, that name, image, and likeness is more important about the development or the destination or the school, I've got to reconsider what I'm doing. Everybody always says, well, you have to play the game. And I always say to myself, well, do you? Is Saban worse or better off with NIL? It doesn't really matter. He can play it.
The great coaches will just
that trains.
We asked that
Dabo Swinney can play it either way. Jim Harbaugh can play it either way.
Yeah.
Where NIL is gonna the guys that are going to A&M, 70% of those guys have the opportunity to go to A&M anyway.
Yep.
It's not like, oh, we didn't have the opportunity before, but now that we have NIL, oh, I'm going to A&M. The dogs are still the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
What I hope that it does is it levels the playing field for decision makers that are trying to decide between a Wisconsin and Iowa and a Nebraska, or a Cincinnati or a Michigan State in Nebraska, right? Should Michigan State have any more stroke than Nebraska in the recruiting game? They shouldn't.
No.
Nebraska has the history. They have the fiscal savvy. They have the community support. They have 90,000. They have 1.9 million in the state where you are the only show in town. So I say all that to say they have to work out the kinks first of the wild, wild west before they figure out how it makes it fit for them.
Yeah.
Because NIL has to work with the recruiting base that you've targeted. There has to be a fit. If you need a supplemental NIL deal for a supplemental type recruit, somebody that's kind of out of the ordinary, the rare 4.5, 5-star that you ordinarily wouldn't get, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the bulk of your groceries, what I consume during the course of the day for my meals, has to be my protein and my carb. Those are those guys, or my starch. Those are those guys that are the redshirt freshmen, the redshirt sophomores that are starting in their second year, have contributed their redshirt freshman year, that are ready to play. That's how Nebraska's got to be able to negotiate it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and when I hear Wild West, I guess for me, I look at it as kind of like a new frontier. You know what I mean? Like who were the guys that got rich in the Wild West, right? They were the ones who were the first ones there. They were the ones that traveled the hard lands, fought for what they wanted to get, established their territory, and basically built from there. Well, let me finish, Honke. And so I think that with something like NIL with a combination, and I actually, now that you've kind of explained a little bit more than you did on the podcast the other day, I think that it's a combination of NIL, where NIL is going to maybe work best is in the transfer portal, because I think that a lot of those guys in the transfer portal are looking for that little extra something else. And that's why they left where they were at, right? Those are those guys that you're referring to that are going to be your dessert, right?
Let me stay with that analogy for a minute. If you like Westerns and you've seen Open Range or The Magnificent Seven, Open Range had guys, the free grazers were those guys that were frowned upon, right? And the guys that did the early work felt like they were entitled to tell Duvall and Costner and those guys how to go about doing their business. Duvall and Costner are kind of saying to themselves, hey, listen, we've earned the right, we belong. So let's just figure out where these two worlds meet.
Mm-hmm.
That's the new frontier in the Wild West.
Yeah.
The Wild West is cool if you're the first one there, but that your work's not done though.
Yeah,
Right? You could have forged all the work. And
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but it's
but your work's not done.
I'm also a paint your wagon kind of guy.
Yeah, Rob. Part of the Wild West too is exactly what we talked with Craig Doman, JoJo's dad, last week about, which is there's no rules and regulation in place yet. This has been sloppily put together by the NCAA. So when you have no rules and regulations, it's the Wild West, which is no different than 150 years ago when you're just forging away across the pioneers.
Early on, it's gonna be a little bit of a free for all.
Yeah, you want to be good.
I don't disagree with that, but my point is that it was a free for all, but you also had to establish yourself, right? Last man standing, and then everyone else kind of followed once you made the territory safe. And I know that Nebraska, I mean, we've heard it from multiple sources that Nebraska is already kind of ahead of the game in the NIL game as it is, and in a lot of ways. Maybe not so much now that a few months, but to start, and even that with like the collective that they have, they're already right there, at least towards the top. How's that? Is that a fair statement?
I always tell people I like to major in the major and minor in the minors. If it's minor, I don't really worry about it. So what's minor to me? What Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, those schools that are already in play for those kids are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes down to like I said, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan State, Cincinnati, Colorado, some of these schools in the area, even like a K-State to some degree, when it comes down to NIL between those schools regionally, that's something I would major in. I don't concern myself with what Alabama's doing, because you know what? Alabama's not concerning themselves with what we're doing.
Yeah,
and so you have to start somewhere. I always tell people, if you want to go eat, you better start with the first course. If you start envisioning all the things that you can eat, all you do is you take little nibbles of everything, trying to move on to the next thing, and don't really enjoy your meal. Get the first course down, figure out where you're at, then order next. Nebraska's got to do what they do better relative to what they can control. That's my deal.
We talked with Sipple about that a couple of months ago. I asked the question, I went through some of our former coaches, whether it's Pelini or whoever, and how would they have adapted to the NIL and transfer portal world? And then, of course, you go all the way back to Osborne. And the answer was, it's an easy answer, and it's a perfect answer. And Sip gave it right away, which is the great ones adapt. You mentioned Saban earlier. Saban's just going to be the best in college football at the transfer portal. He'll just be the best at NIL, and whatever else you throw at him, he'll just find a way to be the best. And Osborne would have done the same, would have been capable of doing the same thing 25 years ago. Whatever. You just, you take every resource you have, right? And Nebraska
Lions typically don't concern themselves with how sheep think.
And this is true.
That's very true. It's funny because we do these and you never know how they're going to go. We had this whole discussion about 90s dynasty and culture.
I had questions about Brian Knuckles. I want to go deep.
Hey, B-Knuck, the quietest person that I was ever around that came with that much hype. Everybody always told me all these great things about B-Knuck, and B-Knuck never said anything about Brian Knuckles. He was one of the coolest teammates I've ever had. He was low maintenance, no problem.
Yeah, that talk about spring games to remember. That was one of them for me. I'm like, oh, this guy's wearing 30. They must mean something serious if he's got 30.
Yeah, he was a good teammate. He was a really good teammate.
Well, we're not going to get to that whole discussion tonight. Maybe we could have you back another time, and I'd love to get into that 90s dynasty and culture discussion, because we always talk about culture here, but let's at least get some memories from you. And Abby Harris had a good question here. What's your favorite memory from your time at Nebraska? And I guess that's really whether it's playing or now being a broadcaster or maybe a future parent of one too. Who knows?
My favorite. Considering the slow start I got off to, probably being named captain, right? Mm-hmm. I was never the best. Never a full-time starter, played a ton, and got off to a really slow start. Was almost kicked off twice. didn't really become a Coach Osborne fan until probably my junior year. So I had to overcome myself. I was super immature, made a ton of excuses. And so when my peers kind of recognized my competitiveness and my work ethic, that was a big deal. It sounds kind of selfish because it was about me, but it's primarily because usually your peers let you know where you're at. And for those guys, I mean, I played with so many killers. It was
God, Clinton Childs,
you're
Mon Green,
back.
Jay Sims,
listen,
LP,
literally,
Calvin Jones. You got here in '92, so
yeah.
I mean, that was, again, this is a whole separate conversation, but you got there early enough. Like I was just when Rob and I were taking a tour of the stadium, Tyler Kai was taking us around there on the Friday. Well, you were with us. What am I telling you about? The three of us, and but like got to talk to like Reggie Cooper and some of those guys that were kind of. Yeah, and they were just on the precipice, just before it got really good. And again, for all the young fans, we were winning 9 and 10 games. You know, it wasn't a disaster, but it was somewhat right around 92. Tommy's getting there. That 92 season, you go and you play Florida State really good in the Orange Bowl. It's a 27-14 loss. It's the defense was holding up against teams running a 4-3. So we start to make that switch, and I mean, you start to build the dynasty. So you were there over that entire course. And I think of your last game, the 96 Orange Bowl, Virginia Tech, Jim Druckenmiller, all that. You had an amazing game, and we win that. And that team never gets the credit or anything that they deserve because they're the 11-2 team in the middle of all the undefeated teams.
Think about that, Damon, how revered that team would be if it was just any other time in the last 20 years.
We were at the Texas game.
I know.
I'm just laughing that you said you got off to a slow start when you had 6 yards of carry as a redshirt freshman.
Here's the deal. You know what's funny? Everybody talks about that 92 recruiting class because that was like Mike Minner and Jared Tomich and T. Fraze and John Hess, Eric Stokes, Chris Dishman. I mean, it was loaded, right? But that 91 class had Dwayne Harris, Abdul Muhammad, Dante Jones. You know what the key was? I'm telling you. Because Kroll and Pickens and those guys, they were fantastic. Kenny Wilhite, they were great players. The difference between, like, when I first got there and let's say probably 94 was it somehow became okay to cheer for your teammates even though it may be at your expense. See, Dwayne Harris had to cheer for Dante Jones.
Right.
Yeah, Dante Jones kept Dwayne Harris from getting more snaps, right? Like Tremaine Bell had to cheer for Abdul Muhammad. Abdul Muhammad kept Tremaine Bell from getting more snaps. I had to become a Lawrence Phillips fan, right? Brooke and Tommy had to somehow cheer for one another. When that magic started happening, I mean, how would you like to be like Foreman, Jamel Williams, Hess, and Doug Coleman? I mean, who you playing?
Right.
Right?
Phil Ellis, the whole. I mean,
Kareem Moss and Tony Veland and Eric Stokes. Somebody's sitting, right? When you can cheer for those guys, I'm telling you, that's when the magic happens.
For the record, I would like to state that Abdul Muhammad follows me on Twitter and you don't. So.
Hey, I'll start that. I'm going to tell you something. That guy. So there's
I wonder if he listens to the show, honestly, because he responds to me and stuff on Twitter too. It's
There's
the
2 or
weirdest
3
thing.
people that I credit firsthand with saving my career: Ed Stewart, Abdul Muhammad, and Troy Dumas. 3 guys that literally took me by the throat and were like, "Hey, you're blowing it. Get your act together." And to this day, Abdul we have the same birthday. He's one of my best friends. He loves kids. He's so stinking good in the community. And my man is competitive. Oh my
I think every guy you just mentioned there, I think of how unselfish those guys are because you're a wide receiver in that offense back then.
Yeah.
You're not
by definition
the itty bitty
unselfish.
committee of guys, the
Yeah,
itty bitty
that's what they
receivers,
were.
they work their tail off and I always love it when people say you got to be 6'4" to block right now. We got to get a big receiver. I'm like, I saw too many damn guys that could block 25 years ago and would kill you. Corey Dixon's and all those guys.
Could you imagine Reggie Ball, Corey Dixon, and Abdul like being recruited today?
Oh,
Well, that'd be
rough.
Frost should be killed. Like,
But
He would.
and the other guys you mentioned, like Troy Dumas and I can't remember who the other guy you mentioned, maybe Dante Jones or
Dante Jones.
These are guys switching positions midway through and doing things that Ed Stewart's a safety. What, you're going to put me up in a box and make me go up, be an outside linebacker? But he turns himself into a butt kiss
I remember when both those guys were going to quit at one point.
Come here.
And
it's let's follow up on that question too about your favorite Nebraska moment, because we're sitting here and you're reminiscing a bit. Like, what outside of that Orange Bowl, like what was your favorite game that you played in that entire time? Like, what game, maybe not one of like the classics that you see on Big Ten Network running.
You know what it is?
What's that?
Wyoming, 94 at home.
You guys were down like 14-0 or something.
We're getting ready to get beat, and I actually it's a variation of it now, but I kind of took a line from Coach Osborne at the half. Guys were Brooke was not feeling good. We didn't realize that his lungs were in big trouble.
You guys had like no time too.
T. Fraser already wasn't playing, and he said he kept asking. He said, "Who are you? What are you made of? What are we made of?" And nobody really answered the question because it was kind of rhetorical. And he told us in the third quarter that we were going to find out. And from that, I kind of developed, this is over time, like 20 years later, it's kind of my egg principle, right? Whatever's in you when you get squeezed is what comes out. And it totally came from that halftime speech. I think we were trailing at the half, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To a bad Wyoming team. And we won ugly all year that year. Like, revisionist history will have you telling us, you guys, we were pretty sweet, but listen, he stopped spring game. He stopped the spring game. We got kicked off the field during spring practice. We were a mess. That defense was wearing us out, and we couldn't move the ball. But it was a super unselfish, tight-knit team. Like, to this day, guys love one another, and it's that real kind of agape, unconditional love.
Damon, I want to circle back to something you just said, because I hear this so often, and it's a lot of guys, not just guys from your era, but just Huskers that come back and visit. But they almost all have a moment when they wanted to quit and wanted to peel out of here.
Yeah.
Aaron Graham said he kept Brooke Behringer from wanting to leave when he was,
And I'm not here to, crap all over the transfer portal and NIL or anything like that. But I think, and you probably, have a son just about to go do this. What's important to the parents, important to some of these coaches when they really care about the kids, is that growth is painful and it's going to be really hard. It's just how it is. And I think when you make the exit too easy, some guys squeeze out when they really could have used just a little more season, and it changed their life. How you're a coach, you're a father, how hard is that message to get across?
It really is, because you have to really consider real time what you've been through. Is it just about opportunity? Have you exhausted all options? Are you being treated truly being treated unfairly? Like, a lot of times that takes a neutral third party.
Sure.
And the culture was so strong. And I remember I called home. I told my dad, we were in the locker room was concrete. So I was in the north end. It was the freshman locker room. I shouldn't have redshirted. I didn't think I should have redshirted. Just ask me. I'd broken the freshman performance index record. I didn't sit the first 3 games. We got ready to go to Washington, and neither Derek Brown nor Calvin Jones got hurt. And so Coach Osborne came to me and basically was like, "Hey, we don't want to burn this year, yada, yada, yada." And, I went through my typical DB pouting, kind of insecure moment. And I called home, and my dad was like, "Hey, he's like, yeah." He said, "You can quit. You can't come home, but you can quit."
I like it.
And I went back to the dorms, and I talked to Troy, who was like to my best friend to this day. And he just put his arm around me. He's like, "I've been there, man." I talked to Ed Stewart, another guy that shares the same birthday as me. A lot of March 2nd guys. I've been there. Lawrence Pete, who was well before me.
That's my son's birthday, actually.
You Pisces are so sensitive.
I know,
Jeez.
babies. Total. You know what? I own it. I wear it. I'm the youngest of 5 too, so it's a double whammy.
Oh, boy.
I'm a double baby.
Yeah, I'm an Aries, so I feel no sympathy.
Like my mom, you love hard and hate harder.
That's right. Man, you just described me in one sentence right there. That was me right there.
I'm a total astrology moon junkie. But so those guys, I just think, like, if they would have compounded the problem or not cared or maybe said, go ahead, maybe it's different. But I remember Lawrence Pete was telling me a story. He's just a guy that I admire as somebody that's older than me that is still really good in the community. And we were just telling stories, and he wanted to quit. He was undersized as a D lineman. He was playing with Neil Smith and moved positions, and he wanted to go back to Wichita. And he was telling me this story about how my dad talked him into staying. And I just think when you get in those tough times, it's all about listening to people that you trust have your best interests at heart. It's no real magic formula except to care. Mm-hmm. And when people can care and tell you the truth out of love, I just think that, the sky's the limit.
I think about, you talked about that Wyoming game and mentioning Troy Dumas and Ed Stewart. I'm not sure if they were the two, but there was the high-low hit.
That was T-Doom. Yeah, when he ripped that quarterback. I mean, you think about green jerseys or what gets called today, targeting or I don't know what you would have called that, but that was pure physical black shirt football and just a thing of beauty. Yeah, he's a definite silent assassin. He probably only said about 15, 20 words a day, and they all mattered.
Yeah,
right.
They all did.
Yeah, he's a good man.
Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Exactly.
Wyoming
right over there on Big Sur Ave. That's where he grew up.
Yeah. 45 minutes north of me. Right here.
This is traditional Redcast. We said we try to keep it to 45 to 60, and we're just over. I want to show you this here because this is kind of maybe the final thing, and we'll get out of here. We have a shared friend, Doug, and you're coach right now, but you're coaching something a little bit.
Number 9. Omaha, Nebraska, 6th grade youth football. Lake Meyer with the pass to Zaylen Rocco. Great one-handed grab for the touchdown for the junior Wildcats.
Did you hear Peyton?
I tell you what, he's a stud. That is, hey, that team is really good too. They're going to be scary this year. But I just saw him this weekend. He's actually booked my reservations. Zaylen is a stud. That whole team is pretty good. I keep telling those guys we're wearing the junior Wildcats, but at some point, man, we got to cross over.
Well, Mac and I coached together for a number of years. I coached 18 years of youth football in Lincoln, which is 4th through 8th grade. We don't have junior high football in Lincoln. So, Cole Penzick and other kids that went on played
played for his dad in the Arena League.
Dan coached with me for 3 years. He actually grew up down the street from my parents in Columbus.
I may have his fingerprints somewhere around my neck.
Oh, he has some great stories. One of the best storytellers.
Yeah, that guy was great, man. I was feeling sorry for myself in the locker room. Imagine that. And he just kind of snatched me from behind and told me to get my butt in gear. And he meant it with love, man. And I think I had a pretty good second half, but he another one of those guys. It's not one of the fake tough guys.
No,
Pensick was different.
Oh man, he was a blast. Well, as is tradition on the Redcast here, we're going to go around the room. Everyone gets a parting shot, and our guest gets the final one. So I'll start with you, Rob, and we'll end with Damon.
Well, my parting shot is, hey, Redcasters, keep your eyes and ears open because we do have a lot of exciting stuff here coming up. Not some stuff that I can talk about yet in true Benning fashion, I suppose you could say. Not a lot of stuff that I can talk about, but
passive aggressive.
But I can tell you, I've been listening to a lot of your show lately. So, but there's not a lot of stuff I could talk about, but I can guarantee you that there are a lot of good things on the horizon here for the Redcast. So keep your eyes peeled.
And Damon, I got to just to give a little background on Rob too. I mean, Mac and I, we're Columbus guys. We can do all the Husker trivia and go back in time. And I mean, we love Husker football from day one. Rob is from Northern California. He's transitioned into being a Husker really the last 5-6 years. And this guy, he's put in the work. So I mean,
I do enjoy
my
that
sister's
passion.
In all fairness, my grandfather's from Gothenburg, and we used to watch. I mean, I watched you play in the 90s. Like,
Wait a minute,
like
who's
family
your
gatherings.
grandfather?
His name is George Novacek.
No,
Yeah.
of the Novaceks.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Isn't that something?
Yeah,
Well,
I wasn't gonna bring that up, but
because he's a name dropper.
Because I am a name
drops names
dropper.
left and right.
he is.
I don't do
Novacek,
this so
he was-
much anymore. But
he was
yeah.
my Shrine Bowl coach.
Okay.
Is
Yeah.
that right? That's crazy.
How about that?
Yeah.
Man,
You know what's funny about that though? My sister's been in she's been in the Bay Area for almost 20 some odd
Whereabouts?
years. She's a professor. She's at San Francisco University. She
Okay.
started at Cal Berkeley.
SFU.
She's passive aggressive too.
I tell you what, though, I enjoy the local media's not too hidden jealousy about your access. You know, you can hear them rib you all the time. Well, we don't all get to do what Damon gets walking around doing.
And you know what though?
I mean, you know what? If you got it, you flaunt it. Like that's
I
just
don't
the way
think
the
you've
world
ever-
I
works.
really don't though.
Yeah,
I don't think
mean,
you've ever abused it.
I
Honestly.
don't have.
It just
I
seems
was
to
just
be
messing with you too. That was just because I hear you say that a lot. You know, like on
That's
your
all right.
show, and I do, and I seriously, it's been like all Benning all week for like the last 2 weeks. So
Well, you
I
guys
mean,
are such a presence on social media. I feel like you're everywhere.
well, you know what? We try to be. I was just in Lincoln 2 weeks ago. Now I'm back here in Greeley, and who knows? I might be in Ireland.
I don't
No,
think that's what he
I'm
meant.
serious though. If it's about branding, that Go Big Redcast, that I don't know if it's just because I follow a lot of you. It's everywhere.
You don't follow me.
That's this guy right
I'm
here.
on it.
That's this guy right here.
Yeah, that's Honky, man. That's
All right.
You can teach an old dog new tricks.
branding
and He's
machine.
got it.
Mac, what do you got?
I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. I mean, and actually to you guys too
Oh,
for letting me
dude.
come back on, and this has been a real treat for me.
I'm just your replacement.
You're
man.
such a direct connection to like my early Husker years, and you've been here the whole time, so it's like you're our age. It just makes a lot of sense. It was so great talking with you. We could have done it for hours, so I really appreciate
it,
you
man.
coming on.
I'm a lot more easygoing than I let people on. Once you get in there, it's fine. I'm just not great at the beginning, so I'll be better.
You're fine.
Well, and hopefully you can be better on the show again. And we'd love to have you back.
Hey,
We really
anytime.
would.
You guys are in the deal now, so it's fine.
That's awesome. And we'd love to get,
I'll take good care of you.
like I said, I'd love to do a deep dive 90s kind of culture talk, because I think there's
I just want to do a running back talk.
well, yeah,
for the
this guy right here. I mean, he's the running back ace and could have that conversation.
Yeah,
Damon, take us.
Jack Stark.
I just
is,
want to go game by game in the '94 season. Talk about you. I'm just
Hey,
kidding.
that's awesome. That's the kind of stuff I like doing. Jack Stark's one of my best friends to this day, and we started on the Unity Council together. And so, you want to get into culture? We can talk culture.
That'd be awesome.
Fantastic.
All right, Damon, take us out of here. What you got?
Hey, you guys, anytime you need me, I appreciate it. Keep doing what you do too. Like social media can be toxic, and I like the fair share of. I wouldn't call it Kool-Aid. I'm team positive, man. I like positive. So keep doing what you're doing, man. I'll be a part of it.
All right,
Appreciate
well,
it. Thanks so much, Damon.
that's awesome.
You
Well, I
got
hope you enjoyed tonight, Redcasters. Until the next one, that was a Go Big Redcast.
Go Big Red.
Be easy,
Yeah.
guys.